shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Behave yourselves!
Hello YouTubers out there, this is Saravia the Movies. So today we're taking a look at Killers of the Flower Moon, a new film by director Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro, Leonardo DiCaprio, and most importantly, Lily Gladstone. This is of course based on a book which I've read over the summer called Killers of the Flower Moon, of course, and The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann. This was published back in 2017. So, the book itself is a non-fiction book, sort of written as a procedural, kind of like a police procedural. Some of it from the perspective, to a certain extent, of the FBI man Tom White, who came to the Osage County out in Oklahoma to investigate, back in the 1920s, all these murders that were taking place, and who was doing them, and more importantly, why. So, now, the film is not really from that perspective at all. In fact, Tom White, kind of played by Jesse Plemons, shows up late in the picture, and it is really told from the perspective of Ernest Burkhart, played by Leo DiCaprio, who's this World War I vet who was a cook during the war. He comes to Oklahoma to work for his uncle, a cattle rancher named William Hale, played by Robert De Niro, in clearly the most frigid villain I've seen in movies in quite some time. I can only think of one more frigid, which this film sort of shares a little kinship, but not exactly. It's a different type of movie. There Will Be Blood by Paul Thomas Anderson came out in 2007. And he has a little kinship with the Daniel Day-Lewis character in that picture. But this guy is really, it's the most chilling performance I think I've seen Robert De Niro do in quite some time, without any of the facial tics and expressions that he's best known for having played either a psycho or a villain in the past. Here, it's just so, he's a gentleman. You know, this guy is just, he's loved by the Osage people. They love him back. He is known as king of the Osage Hills, essentially. And that is the charm of the guy, but there is that undercurrent of true evil. The character of Ernest Burkhart visits his uncle, and the uncle tells him, "You like money, you like women, this place is flowing with money," because what happened is that the Osage tribe, they were living on this land, and one day oil was found. And it just spews out of the ground. And a lot of these Osage people became wealthy. The richest per capita at that time. This is, of course, the 1920s. And Lily Gladstone, in a truly marvelous performance. I mean, I would be shocked if she didn't win. It's nothing to do with diversity. She is an exemplary actress. And, but she is the heart and soul of this movie in many ways. So they become rich, and they even have white servants. Imagine that. And this is a chapter in history that has not really been given a whole lot of, I guess you could say, credence. It's not talked about very often through almost a whole century, until this guy wrote this book, really. Apparently, there was a other book written about this, and in fact in 2002 there was a book which I haven't really read yet, told from the perspective of an Osage member, A Pipe for February. And this was written by Charles H. Redcorn, and it was published back in 2002. I'd never heard of this book prior to seeing the film, but it was recommended to get this book and this one as well. So this one I will be reading. I heard it may become a film. I don't know if it will, but hopefully it will. But I haven't read it yet. But anyway, so the Osage tribe, they were rich, and they had fancy cars. They, went on these races through town. They owned these houses, and they could afford to buy whatever they wanted. But their money was being controlled by white guardians due to reservation laws. So all of this, in the middle of this, Ernest Burkhart becomes a driver because the Osage members, they're so rich, they have limo drivers, of course, technically. Not limos, but they're, And Ernest Burkhart is a driver for Molly, and they slowly start to fall in love once they see each other frequently enough. And of course, this is encouraged by Hale, because you see, what happens is this. The white men are marrying these native women. Molly has 2 other sisters, and both are murdered. One in a house explosion. The other one is Anna, who is very blunt, very drunk all the time. She's shot in the head. And the reason is because the white men, once they marry these women, they get the head rights. And the earnings of this oil and all that wealth becomes theirs. And that is the most disturbing part of this film and the book itself, is that it really delves into that, into this sort of a sickness in the prairie lands. This is a whole new type of territory for Martin Scorsese. He's never really dealt with prairies in the past, or horses, other than Kundun, which had horses. But essentially, this is a new landscape, new type of characters. And Ernest Burkhart, who is not very smart and a bit of a weasel, essentially, and by the way, there are spoilers here. I've already stated that. I don't see the point in making this spoiler because it's history, and if you read the book, you're not gonna. There's nothing in the film that will seem spoiler worthy. But anyway, I guess I have to say that anyhow. So Ernest Burkhart slowly poisons Molly, his wife, because they do get married. I don't think I mentioned that before. And so what happens is eventually they get insulin brought in by these doctors, because what happens is that a lot of the women have diabetes. A lot of the men too, which I don't think was brought up in the film that much, but in the book it is. The men started to, they would ingest a lot of alcohol. They also ate what they called white man's food, very sugary starch foods. But the women wouldn't live past the age of 50 for the most part, other than maybe Molly's mother, although I think she dies in her 50s. I don't remember exactly. They're given the injection of insulin, and Ernest Burkhart gives her injections of insulin, but he also is adding poison to it, and is trying to kill her so that he can get the rights to these, to the oil deposits and everything else. It's a very somber film. It's the most somber film I think I've seen Scorsese do, other than The Irishman, which had a somber feeling throughout it. This film is curiously a lot like The Irishman in that sense. It's kind of an elegy, and it's not really a fun time at the movies, but then again, I don't know of too many Martin Scorsese movies that are necessarily meant to be fun times. And I've heard some critics say, "Oh, it's not really entertaining." Not many, but a few. And that's not really this kind of film. But it moves and throbs, thanks largely to the editing, of course, the camera work. Scorsese at the top of his game here, as pretty much always. I mean, I don't think he's ever been less than at the top of his game. Giving 110% to every film, even those that are not necessarily the greatest films of his career. He still gives 110%, in my opinion. I think I always sense that every film that I've seen of his. But it's also the late Robbie Robertson's score, which has sort of this incessant drum beat. It starts high, then it goes low. And there are peaks and valleys. It's just very. It's not intrusive. It's there to guide you along. But this is not an upbeat film. But then again, if you know Martin Scorsese, you know upbeat is not exactly in his glossary of terms when applied to movies of his. And probably the most upbeat movie he's ever done is Hugo, which came out over 10 years ago. I mean, I can't think of anything that was really more upbeat than that. But this is a new kind of film for him, and it's very poetic. It's the most poetic film I think I've seen him do in a long time. In fact, just the opening sequence in itself, when the oil spews out of the ground, and you see it in slow motion, which was shot, I believe, in 700 frames per second. All these Osage members dancing around, they're bare-chested, around the oil as it just falls on them, and they're kind of drenched in it. There is the executions in the film are handled in a way that also reminded me of The Irishman. You sort of see them in the distance as they happen. Sometimes they're not too close. You're at enough of a distance that you don't really you're not immersed in it like sometimes the violence in some of his other films. But Lily Gladstone is the heart and soul of this movie, and I probably will do a separate video just discussing Molly Burkhart. And some of the criticisms about this film already that have come out. It's only been a week, and already these criticisms are quite volatile, I think, in terms of the perspective of this film, which has shifting perspectives. Osage Tribe, Molly Burkhart. Osage Tribe, Molly Burkhart. William Hale, Ernest Burkhart, Molly Burkhart, right at the center of, I think, everything. So I'm not going to really say that it's told from her point of view, but it's certainly, because it initially was very much a police procedural type movie, they shifted that to go from the inside out, as Scorsese said, so that you're really within the intimacy of these characters and their relationships and what they are trying to do. Motivation is not exactly there. We don't know why William Hale does what he does. We don't understand why Ernest Burkhart feels that money is everything, and at the expense of his own family, and all these other characters too. But I still feel, and I'm sure that some people agree and maybe disagree, Molly Burkhart, in many ways, she informs this film. I think Scorsese sort of, in a very sublime way, in a subliminal way, sort of injects that in here. And now the film ends with apparently a controversial ending, which I don't know why it's that controversial. It sort of was in sync with everything else in terms of tone to some degree. And it ends with a radio play, and which did happen. There was a radio play at the time, orchestrated, or it was insisted upon by J. Edgar Hoover, of course, was the head of the FBI, to have a radio play that dealt with the Osage Nation and the particular characters involved. And in that case, in the case of the film, this is done in such a way to discuss what happened to these people. And then there's a tearful moment. It was a very strong moment delivered by Martin Scorsese as he appears on the stage. Everyone else is very upbeat, and there's all this drums and all these sound effects, kind of like, obviously like radio plays, if you ever heard any. It sort of sounds just like the ones they used to have back then in the 1920s and 30s. And his approach to Molly Burkhart's death, without really mentioning what happened, which of course all these murders and how it was orchestrated, was quite powerful. And then it has an incredible overhead shot that reminded me a little bit of a similar moment in Kundun, where the camera sort of pulls up from the ground, these close up of the drums, and it pulls all the way back, and it's a ceremonial tribal dance. And it almost gave me a sense of hope for the Native Americans, that they can rise above all this, that at the end of the day, money doesn't mean anything, because their feeling, spiritually speaking, is they can't take money with them when they die. When they become spirits, money means nothing. It's just paper. And since the film opens with a ceremonial burial of a peace pipe, and then to end with this tribal dance, told me that at the end of the day, you know what, the money and the wealth, for some of them who didn't partake in it, it didn't mean anything. And they're able to rise above it. It's really quite a special moment at the end of the film. I'm not ranking this film. I will say it's one of his great films for sure. Yet again, I mean, it's just amazing to me how Martin Scorsese has consistently surprised me, and in the last decade and a half, especially, or I would say even closer to 20 years since The Aviator and Gangs of New York. Because there was a moment where after Bringing Out the Dead, I think I even wondered, what else is he going to do after this? What stories will interest him? And he found a way to still be interested and motivated in making all these types of films. And this one is the most unusual film of his, and the most potent and powerful film I think he's made in quite some time. It's just extraordinary. I don't know what to say. I was just flabbergasted. And so anyway, whether you read the book first or watch the film in theaters now, either way, I don't think it matters. You have the more detailed explanation, not so much of the characters, although there's a little bit of that, but the exploration of this culture to some degree. And so if you read the book first and see the film, is the way I did it, that's not a bad thing. If you see the film, you'll want to read this book, if you like the film, if you like this history. It needs to be taught. And from what I understand, they're not going to be teaching this book in Oklahoma. And that's a damn shame. So those are my thoughts. I don't know what the rest of you think out there. By the way, the 3.5 hours felt like 2.5, and maybe for some people 2.5 hours is still too long. I guess it would be for some people. But not for me. I think this film really delivers ounce for ounce, moment by moment, scene by scene, second by second. It's riveting. I was never really, there wasn't a moment where I thought, this is maybe going on a little too long, and if it did, I would say so, believe me. I'm not just saying that being a huge fan of America's finest director, because he really is, Martin Scorsese. It's just that he told this story and knows how to tell it. It's really in the hands of a master. And I don't know of anyone else that would have done it nearly as well. But like some Osage members have said, this story maybe should have been told by an Osage person. And I don't disagree, but you know what? This is a start. And the greed needed to be told. This story needed to be told in terms of the greed, and not just Molly Burkhart. She informs the film, but the greed, William Hale, I would say it's like this. Molly Burkhart is here, and like a flower, the rest of it blossoms from there. I believe that. So I'm not saying it's really told from her perspective, but she's the heart and soul of the film. And so those are my thoughts. What are yours? Have you seen the film? What do you think of Killers of the Flower Moon? How does it rate for you overall in terms of De Niro, DiCaprio, Scorsese? And what do you think of Lily Gladstone? It's a really great cast. I can't even get into everything because there's so much. So I will do a separate video to discuss a little more in-depth certain things about the film and the criticisms about it. So anyway, that will be coming up soon. So those are my thoughts. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. I guess that's all I got to say about that. And if you have subscribed, thank you. I've gotten more subscribers in the last few days. And hit that notification bell for future uploads. That's all I got to say about that. Please check out Killers of the Flower Moon. At the very least, read the book. Either way, you'll want to, I think vice versa, you want to do both. It's an amazing picture. That's all I got to say about that. This is Jerry Saravia at the Movies, signing off.